Welcome to all those who have just joined us. We'll give one more minute to get a few others online here. Okay, I think we can get going now. Give Priscilla a chance to have her whole time with us. My name is John Kress. I try to give some guidance to the uh, Class Act HR 73 Environment and Climate Change Group. And we started this Learn at Lunch effort, almost 2 years ago, maybe, to first start hearing from some of the members of our environmental working group. Then it kind of expanded out to invite people that we knew as friends or relatives. And now it's expanding out to invite people that we think will have some important things to say to our group. Uh, so we have these periodically. There's no regular schedule. We do not have another uh, Learn at Lunch. And I should say, because there's people tuning in from not only the Northeast, but across the US and even outside the US, we now call this Learn at Brunch because there are some people that are just sitting down at breakfast uh, to, to join us on this. Uh, so anyway, we do not have any scheduled right now. We'll probably pick up again in the late summer, early fall. However, if any of you have any people that you think would fit in and there's a certain limited schedule that they can only join us sometime this summer, please let us know. Let Henrietta or myself know, and we can schedule something within a week or two. So please let's keep this going, and we will pick up again in the fall. There'll be a lot going on in the fall with the elections coming up. So now I'd like to introduce Henrietta, who kind of moderates these and keeps these moving forward, and she'll introduce today's speaker. Henrietta?
Hi, thanks, and welcome everyone. I'm pleased to introduce Priscilla Brooks, who is Vice President of for Ocean Conservation at the Conservation Law Foundation, and I'll let her tell you more about what that does. Priscilla holds a BS from Cornell and a master's and PhD in marine resource economics from the University of Rhode Island. She has been a champion of the oceans for a long time, and I hope we welcome her. Scylla will be talking for about 25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussions. So Scylla, take it away.
Thank you, Henrietta. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. Today I am gonna, I guess we could start the PowerPoint with the first slide. Wait, maybe put that into slideshow mode. Awesome. So today I am going to talk about our work to defend the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. I'll talk about what that is. It is the only monument in the Atlantic. And I'm going to start today with some background on land protection in the U.S. and the federal law that's responsible for our system of monuments. Then I'll introduce you to the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts and the fight over the years to preserve its protections, a fight that we continue to engage today. So next slide. So Conservation Law Foundation, we are an environmental advocacy organization. We're 60 years old, and our mission is to protect New England's environment for all people. We focus on New England. And, you know, for most of my 32-year career at CLF, I have directed the Ocean Conservation Program, whose mission is to restore and protect New England's ocean ecosystem. Next slide. So just a little grounding. I am, you know, talking to you from Ipswich, Massachusetts today. I don't know where everyone else is, so I'm not going to assume that you know that much about New England's ocean, but this is it. The United States has jurisdiction of its ocean waters out to 200 miles, which would take you, just a little ways beyond George's Bank, which is this big, shallow bank on the bottom part of this slide. But I like to think of this as New England's backyard, and this is the area that my career has focused on for the last 3+ decades. CLF has, for a long time, really since the mid-1970s, been working to steward this incredible area. It's one of the most productive ecosystems in the world, and CLF has been engaged in a number of fights to protect it, starting in the 70s with litigation to prevent oil and gas development in New England or off New England, and we've done that multiple times, and to this day there is no oil and gas development off of New England. We've also been engaged in cleaning up marine waterways. The most significant one is Boston Harbor. We've, for decades now, and this continues, been working to stop overfishing of our legendary fish populations. And I'm talking about cod, haddock, flounder, that sort of bread and butter of the New England fleet that's been overfished for decades, and many populations are very, very depleted. I've also worked on comprehensive ocean plans, kind of a little bit of, you might call it ocean zoning, because we're seeing increasing interest in more industrial activity in our ocean, not just commercial fishing, but, for example, offshore wind. And then finally, we've been engaged since about 2000 in working to create, protected areas in the sea, ocean parks, something called marine protected areas. But before we get into the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, I want to give a very cursory background on the movement to conserve lands and waters in the U.S. Next slide. So in the U.S., we've understood for a very long time the importance of setting aside areas for conservation. President Ulysses S. Grant signed a bill into law establishing Yellowstone National Park in 1872 to protect its tremendous natural resources there. That first national park would start a worldwide movement of national parks. Now 100 nations and 1,200 national parks and preserves today. The national park system, some say it's the best idea America ever had. Next slide. Another major milestone was the passage of the Antiquities Act of 1906, which Teddy Roosevelt signed into law. And this legislation gives the President of the United States authority to designate national monuments. And I put up these many words because this is what the act says. And some of the wording highlighted in red have spawned several lawsuits and are at issue in several lawsuits. And in particular, things like, what are objects? They have to be on lands owned or controlled by the government of the United States. Some would question whether oceans was contemplated there when the word is lands. And in particular, a notion that the monument will be confined to the smallest area compatible with the proper care and management of the objects to be protected. And that gets to, there have been questions about, did the Antiquities Act contemplate, protection of vast areas and ecosystems? So I'll come back to this. Next slide. So Teddy Roosevelt established the first national monument, which was Devil's Tower here on the left, which is in Wyoming. But 17, he would establish 17 more monuments during his tenure as president. 18 presidents in all have created national monuments, and currently there are 138. Monuments are really varied. Of course, they're the ones that folks know about, Canyon de Chelly and Grand Canyon, Bears Ears in Utah, which is on the far lower right, Mount St. Helens, which is the volcano on the bottom, but also importantly, historic sites and cultural sites. And the house on the left is Medgar Evers' house in Jackson, Mississippi, which President Biden established as a national monument. But you'll notice there are no ocean areas here because it would take 100 years before the U.S. established its first national monument in the ocean. Next slide. This astounding reality stems from an age-old ethic of inexhaustibility begun centuries ago when the first explorers were astonished by the wealth of fish in the sea. Perhaps you might have heard of tales of codfish so thick that fishermen could walk the sea on their backs. In 1883, in a famous paper, English biologist Thomas Huxley, who is known as Darwin's bulldog, wrote that I believe that the cod fishery, the herring fishery, the pilchard fishery, the mackerel fishery, and probably all the great sea fisheries are inexhaustible. And that is to say that nothing we do seriously affects the number of fish. And any attempt to regulate fisheries seems consequently, from the nature of the case, to be useless. Well, unfortunately, we know that's not the case. But this notion of inexhaustibility would last a long, long time and to some extent persists today. But like the great bison herds, which used to roam the West, that are reputed to have extended beyond sight before reckless hunting annihilated them, the passenger pigeon and the great auk, next slide, the Atlantic cod has been drastically diminished through overfishing to the point of collapse. And this is due, again, to widespread overfishing of New England's ocean waters and disturbance of seafloor habitat. And this is the same case with Atlantic cod up in Canada. But this here you see, estimates of biomass from 1978 to 2023. Just a massive, massive decline. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5% of what scientists consider to be a healthy population level. So next slide. So this is a slide that shows fishing activity off of New England from 2015 to 2019. And it's what it shows, it's a heat map, so that, the warm colors, the red is the most intense fishing, which you see, really all along the coast and maybe on the edge of Georgia's bank. And then orange is a little less, and green is a little less, and blue is the least amount. But what this slide demonstrates is that, almost every square inch of New England's ocean is impacted by fishing. And this in particular is certain kinds of fishing. Ground fish and scallop fishing are done by dragging heavy nets and dredges across the seafloor. Herring typically drags a midwater net that catches all the fish in its way, and herring is an important forage fish. But, fishing is not a benign activity. It removes vast amount of biomass from the ocean, as we could see from cod. It alters food chains. It damages the seafloor with repeated passes of heavy trawl gear. The vertical lines of trap gear and midwater nets entangle fish, marine mammals, turtles, and seabirds. It provides wonderful seafood, but it's not without its impacts. Next slide. But in addition to overfishing, the world is facing daunting challenges that go way beyond that, and that is climate change. You know, for decades, the ocean has literally been taking the heat for climate change, absorbing about 90% of the heat and a quarter of the carbon dioxide from greenhouse gas emissions since the Industrial Revolution. The result is that the ocean is warmer, more acidic, less oxygenated, and less productive. It ultimately is less suitable for fish and wildlife. Here in New England, and in particular the Gulf of Maine, the ocean's warming faster than 97% of the global ocean. And yet, you know, the ocean is vital to life on the planet. It's the cornerstone of the Earth's life support system, shapes our climate and weather. It's what makes life possible for us. The ocean covers 70% of the planet by aerial extent, and by volume contains 95% of the livable planet. Every other breath we take comes from the ocean. That's right, 50% of the oxygen on Earth comes directly from the ocean. This happens because of phytoplankton, the microscopic plant-like organisms that drift near the ocean's surface. Just like trees and plants on land, they use sunlight and photosynthesis to convert carbon dioxide into oxygen, and all that, so making the health of the ocean absolutely critical. Next slide. Well, and nature, like the climate, is at a tipping point. In nature, these are some statistics from the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. I think it was published in 2019, and there's a new assessment due to be released, I think, in 2028. But this assessment found that 75% of the land surface is significantly altered. This is on the planet. 66% of the ocean area is experiencing cumulative impacts. Over 85% of wetlands have been lost. I think that is staggering to me. A million, roughly 12.5% of the planet species are threatened with extinction. Half the live coral over coral reefs has been lost since the 1870s, with accelerating loss due to climate change, and that statistic is, it's probably more than half at this point. And then finally, 20 to 30% of corals, sharks, marine mammals are threatened with extinction. So next slide. This double whammy of climate change and biodiversity loss has led scientists like the great E.O. Wilson from Harvard to say we need to set aside half the planet, or half Earth, in its natural state to prevent mass extinctions and limit the worst impact of climate change and safeguard people that rely on nature to survive and thrive. Towards that end, there was a paper published in 2019 calling for a global deal for nature, calling for the protection of 30% of the world's oceans and 30% of land. More than 190 countries have formally committed to the 30 by 30 goal. However, the progress is slow, and almost certainly this will not be met. About 18% of land and inland waters and 10% of the marine areas are currently protected globally, leaving a huge gap. In the United States, in his second week in office, President Biden issued an executive order to pursue 30 by 30. However, that executive order was rescinded by the current administration. Currently, only about 13% of U.S. lands and 23% of the ocean is protected, and as you'll see, most of that is in the Pacific. Let's move to the next slide. So with this backdrop, and 100 years after the Antiquities Act was passed, George W. Bush established the first marine national monument with Papahanaumokuakea. And this, the area that's lavender there, it's really part of the northern Hawaiian Islands. That was the first one. There will be several other Pacific monuments designated. The Marianas Trench, which is on the far left of the globe. That area, as you may know, is the deepest place in the world's ocean. It's 7 miles deep at its deepest spot. And then there would be several smaller islands that would be protected as part of the Pacific Heritage Island Marine National Monument, in addition to Rose Atoll, which is the sort of southernmost area. But all in all, 1.1 million square miles of the Pacific have been protected as national monuments. And just take note that, these areas are far away from the U.S. continental shelf. They're far away from everything. They are truly, in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the Pacific. Okay, next slide. Here in the Atlantic, we finally got our first marine national monument, and that was the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, designated by President Obama in 2016. As I mentioned earlier, it's the first and only marine national monument in the Atlantic, located about 130 miles off the coast of Cape Cod. It's about 5,000 square miles in extent and covers just 1.5% of the U.S. Atlantic waters. So 5,000 square miles compared to 1.1 million square miles in the Pacific. Just noting that. The monument comprises 3 canyons on the edge of Georges Bank, Oceanographer Canyon, Gilbert Canyon, and Lydonia Canyon, and then 4 seamounts, which are underwater extinct volcanoes. These canyons are deeper than the Grand Canyon, and the seamounts rise higher than any mountain east of the Rocky Mountains. The monuments typically, and certainly in the Northeast Canyons, prohibit damaging extractive and other activities, including commercial fishing, oil and gas development, minerals mining, and dumping. As I mentioned, commercial fishing can damage marine wildlife and the habitats that they depend upon. Next slide. So the upwelling created by this topography of seamounts and canyons that rise up from the seafloor bring nutrients from the bottom to the shallow waters. And, it really makes for an incredibly productive area to support this biodiversity hotspot. The strong and complex currents there support significant and diverse concentrations of marine life within this small area. On the cliffs and crags of the monument, colonies of vivid cold-water corals grow, some 54 coral species we know about to date. Some are the size of small trees, and they can be centuries old. They grow very, very slowly. They're highly vulnerable to human disturbance. Scientists have even referred to the seamount hard corals as the old-growth redwoods of the deep ocean. Given their distribution in all the ocean basins and the fact that they can live for centuries, deep-sea corals have been used to reconstruct past changes in global climate and oceanographic conditions. And also, scientists think that, only about 50% of the potential species in the monument have been documented. It's really, it's become this living laboratory, but it's far away and scientists don't get out there very often. There's been research cruises in the last few years. There's one coming up in July. Okay, next slide. This just gives you a sense about the biodiversity. I mean, it really only touches it, but 15 species of whales and dolphins have been identified. The New England Aquarium does regular aerial surveys of this area, and every single time they come back, having observed hundreds of animals at the surface, marine mammals mainly. But there are many seabirds, including the endangered Atlantic puffin that goes there in the winter to feed, sponges, sea anemones, a myriad of fish and sharks, tuna, swordfish, ocean sunfish, bottom fish like skates and flounders and sea turtles. It's truly a wondrous place. But I think it's best that you take a look for yourself. So next slide. I have a short film.
Pilot, super. Ready to dive?
Pilot is ready.
Going down.
So canyons are, go as deep as 12,000 feet, and the seamounts rise as high as 10,000 feet from the seafloor. Oop.
Sorry. Experiencing a few technical difficulties. There we go. Okay.
That's a Greenland shark. It's the oldest.
The ROV Deep Discoverer just made it to the bottom.
That has the
we're at about
most
2,180
longevity,
meters.
up to 500 years old. Beautiful corals. This was taken by a remotely operated vehicle from a federal NOAA research vessel. These are all corals, shrimp, fish. See, it's rocky. Scallops, crabs. Crabs, kind of eel, beautiful squid, deep sea predation, flounder, that's a monkfish, of course the octopus, beautiful. Flounder, some kind of flounder. Beautiful. Okay. There you go. Take a little dive into the monument. So next slide. Get out of there somehow.
Yeah. Experiencing 1 second. I have to stop sharing and then reshare. Oh, there we go. Maybe not. Okay, 1 second. Alrighty, 1 second off. Sorry about this.
That's okay.
Things will happen, but okay, alrighty. Okay.
There you go. Okay. So since the monument's designation, it has been under consistent attack. So first, President Obama established the monument in 2016. Then President Trump came into office, and in a infamous meeting in a Bangor airport hangar, he issued a declaration opening the monument to commercial fishing, and that was in 2020. President Biden would restore the prohibition on commercial fishing in 2021. President Trump came back into office and fairly quickly opened the monument to commercial fishing again. And on top of this, there has been legislation proposed to prohibit the president from managing fisheries in a monument. There was a hearing on that bill last week. So next slide. So, the presidents have been playing ping pong with the monument, but at the same time, the monument has been consistently defended in court. And in particular, there was a first lawsuit in 2017 after the designation brought by 5 fishing groups, including the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association. CLF and others intervened in that case. And Federal District Court Judge Boasberg, and maybe you've heard of Judge Boasberg because he's been in the press quite a bit, he ruled in our favor, upholding the legality of the monument and dismissing the complaint. The appeals court also, it was appealed, the appeals court upheld the legality of the monument, and it went to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court declined to hear the fishermen's case. The next lawsuit would be brought by CLF and our partners, challenging President Trump's rollback of the commercial fishing prohibition. That case was voluntarily dismissed after President Biden in 2021 reinstated the fishing prohibition. But these lawsuits would continue. 2 commercial fishermen represented by the Pacific Legal Foundation, which is a right-wing law firm, 2 commercial fishermen challenged the monument's legality in 2022, Fahili versus Biden. That case, after several months of discovery, to test the fishermen plaintiffs' assertions that the monument harmed their economic interests, the plaintiffs chose to voluntarily dismiss their lawsuit, ending the litigation. But another lawsuit would be brought by 2 other fishermen, again represented by the Pacific Legal Foundation, and that lawsuit is pending. That was in 2024. And finally, Conservation Law Foundation and our partners, and that's the Natural Resources Defense Council and the Center for Biological Diversity, filed a lawsuit challenging Trump's second rollback of the monument. So that's pending. So next slide. So just I want to harken back to the Antiquities Act for just a second and some of that language. So some of the issues being brought forth by the litigation include questions like, can the president designate a monument in the ocean? Recall that the Antiquities Act talks about, protecting structures and other objects of historic or scientific interest that are situated upon the lands owned or controlled by the U.S. So that there's that question, can you even establish a monument in the ocean? And the second question is the ocean owned or controlled by the federal government? Well, both of those questions were definitively answered in the first lawsuit, in Judge Boasberg's opinion, and later, in the appeals court opinion. So you can designate a monument in the ocean. They are U.S. lands, and they are owned and controlled by the federal government. So then another question that has been asked has to do with whether or not a president can designate an ecosystem as a monument. You know, the Antiquities Act doesn't talk about ecosystems. It talks about historic or scientific, objects of historic or scientific interests that are situated upon the lands of the U.S. But it didn't talk specifically about ecosystems. However, U.S. District Court Judge Boasberg again ruled that the Antiquities Act allows presidents to designate ocean areas and vital marine ecosystems as marine national monuments. You can't just protect the corals, you've got to protect the ecosystem around it to, protect the corals, for example. Another question that's been brought forth is, can the president roll back protections in a monument designated by another president? So this question, no federal court has definitively ruled on whether a president has legal authority under the Antiquities Act of 1906 to diminish or abolish a national monument designated by a predecessor. The core legal question remains entirely untested in the judiciary. CLF's opinion is that the president has the authority only has the authority to regulate federal lands only to the extent that Congress has delegated that authority to the president. The Antiquities Act delegates the president, the authority to establish monuments. But the Antiquities Act did not specifically give the president the authority to abolish or diminish other monuments. Only Congress has that authority. The Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the exclusive power to regulate U.S. territory and property. So that is a question that, hasn't definitively been answered by the courts. Another question relates to this notion of the smallest area compatible. And the Antiquities Act says that, you can reserve as part thereof parcels of land, the limits of which in all cases shall be confined to the smallest area compatible with the proper care and management of the objects to be protected. So that's a question that gets posed in court. In the case of the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, Judge Boasberg dismissed a fishing industry lawsuit, the Mass Lobstermen Association lawsuit, ruling that the boundaries were in fact appropriate. And then finally, there's a question about, does the Antiquities Act give the president authority to prohibit fishing in the monument? There's not that explicit authority, but it gives the president the authority to reserve areas, and can't reserve areas without prohibiting or controlling the activities in those areas. So, but that is a question that will at some point be answered by the court. So, so those are some key questions. It's really fascinating from a purely intellectual point of view. In closing, I want to say that CLF is dedicated to this fight. We've been fighting it for 10 years. We'll continue to fight to protect this area and advance protections for other areas in New England's oceans as well. We're an organization that says we never fight and go home because we are. And that perfectly summarizes our philosophy. We don't give up when the challenges get tough or long legal battles drag on, because we're defending our own backyard. Next slide. So, if you're interested in more information, please get in touch with me. Join Conservation Law Foundation, and we will give you ample opportunity to ring in with Congress, ring in with the president, and otherwise support the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. And with that, I want to thank you for listening and open this up to questions.
Priscilla, thank you so much for that really fascinating talk, really interesting. And I would like to open it up for questions if anybody has any at this point in time. Jackie, oh, you're clapping your hands. I see a lot of hand clapping. Please just raise your hand on the video or use the React raise hand thing at the lower part of your screen.
While folks consider questions, I want to call out a comment that David Wigglesworth made in the chat, and that is that it's hard to build public support for protecting the ocean. I live in an area where like 50% of the area of Ipswich is in protected lands, open space, salt marsh, mud flats. I mean, you feel like there's a lot protected. And when you look out over the ocean, all you see is that blue sheet of water. And you think, well, of course, yeah, that's fully protected. But remember that slide I showed you with the fishing activities? It's not protected. It's really, really subject to very damaging activity constantly. And that's wreaked havoc on the habitat, not to mention the fish populations. So, but it's hard to, to tell people, it's hard to see what's in the ocean, unlike a beautiful Yellowstone. It's hard to be able to say, oh, we've got to, protect the canyons and seamounts because we don't have a lot of video footage. That footage is relatively new. And you have to use words and scientific consensus to make the case.
Yeah, it's hard. I see Jim Engel has a question.
Thanks very much, Priscilla, for that presentation. Enlightening, a little depressing. So I have two questions. One, it seems that lawsuits are an increasing necessity in our current environmental situation, particularly given the actions of the current administration and even of Congress itself. How many current lawsuits is the Conservation Law Foundation a party to? And then another question, which I have often wanted to ask someone who is involved in environmental lawsuits, but I haven't, so I'll ask it now. Approximately how much money does it cost to file a lawsuit of the kind you are talking about? I know they cost money, but there are individuals who occasionally file such suits, apparently without enormous cost. They must have expertise to do it. They must legally know what they're doing. But what is the actual money involved in filing such a lawsuit? I'm sure it ranges, but what does it range from to what? Thank you.
Oh, those are great questions, Jim. Thank you. First off, great question about how many lawsuits. CLF's engaged in, I think it's 17 or 18 different lawsuits challenging the Trump administration's activities. It ranges from offshore wind to, vessels, to the monument, to the whole issue about, climate change and CO2 endangerment, the waters of the U.S. We're just involved everywhere, and we've got a lot of things teed up, such as the Endangered Species Act, where we're expecting a final rule that will strip the notion of habitat protection out of the Endangered Species Act. That will no longer be part of the definition of harm. And of course, if you can't protect the habitat, if dams are being put up that prevent Atlantic salmon from getting up the rivers, that's harm. But anyway, so we are really up to our neck in litigation and expect to continue to be up to our necks in litigation. Your other question about how much does it cost? I don't know. I'm going to be perfectly candid with you. CLF, the lawsuits on the ocean side that we're engaged in, we our members and foundations support, our work. No doubt we do it a lot for a lot less money than a private law firm would charge. Some of these lawsuits, like the ones brought by fishermen around the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts, are being backed by, the Pacific Legal Foundation, which is a law firm that really, selects certain cases to drive home certain issues and to, wrestle that kind of authority out of the president's hands. So, these fishermen, I guarantee you, they are not paying for the lawsuit.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a
Go ahead, John.
I have a question. I thought it was interesting, your early comment or quote of Huxley saying that marine environments were inexhaustible. We thought that about terrestrial environments for a long, long time as well, and now we know they're all too exhaustible. Do you have any idea, are marine environments more vulnerable to degradation than terrestrial environments, or are they all equal? You said 95% of our livable environments are in the oceans. I'm just wondering if you have any concept about that.
Um, I really don't. I mean, my guess is it depends, and I'm sure there are certain types of land-based environments that are incredibly vulnerable to human impacts, just like in the ocean. So I think, but what I think is amazing is that, so much of our ocean, and I just speak about New England, is impacted on a daily basis by fishing. If you could imagine that happening on land, a big, tractor coming through and digging up the earth over that huge area, I think it would wreak a lot of damage. But I don't have a sense about if land is more vulnerable than the ocean. I think it probably depends on the area and the species.
When you made the comment about, well, can we still fish in a marine environment, a marine monument? It's like, can we still cut the trees down in a terrestrial environment? But that's okay. No, that's all part of the ecosystem, which you also define. So thank you very much for all those comments, Priscilla.
Yeah, the challenge in particular with the marine environment and New England especially is that our politicians, they're incredible environmentalists, but when it comes to ocean issues and especially fisheries, they don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
We love our fishermen here in New England. It's part of our culture. We're involved in protecting North Atlantic right whales, which are being the number one impactor to that is lobster traps, and they get entangled in the vertical lines. Oh my God, going after the lobster industry is like, I don't know. It is, we have really hit on sacred ground because everybody loves lobsters and loves lobster boats and the lobster industry. I mean, I really understand that, but it's made it really difficult to get political support for actually doing these protections. When the Northeast Canyon Seamounts was designated, only the Connecticut delegation got behind it. No one in Massachusetts, no one in Maine, no one in New Hampshire, no one in Rhode Island, not in the House and not in the Senate would get out there and champion this. So that tells you a lot.
So following up on that, the image of the lobsterman or the individual fisherman going out on his own to make a living, how much of that is still the case versus the large commercial trawlers and such?
It's still largely the case in New England. We have a lot of owner-operators. There's some big boats that fish out of big ports like New Bedford and Gloucester, but we have a lot of small boat fishermen, and the lobster industry is almost entirely that. So, I get it. That is, when you want to regulate and close an area, you are hitting these people and their families directly. I will say that the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts was designated and designed to limit that. At the time, there was about 5 lobster fishing operations there and 1 crab fisherman. And then there was some, other fisheries like squid and mackerel, but it's, a tiny percentage of their fishing grounds. So it's not like you preclude them from fishing. It's just that they got to move their gear into other areas. And there have been a number of economic studies done that showed, very, very minimal, if any, impact of the monument on fishing revenues. But
if I can just make one more comment on that about comparison terrestrial environments, we have the same thing here in Vermont with loggers. Small time loggers are sacred. Nobody will criticize them. And we're going through a big number of Act 151 and all these other Act 250, trying to compromise urban environments or city environments with natural environments. And just like we talk about the fishermen, we have the same issue with those that are cutting down the forest in some ways. And it's a very tough situation, to say the least. And I think we still have that American feeling of fishermen and loggers as on the frontiers there, and it's just can't keep going that way anymore.
yeah, it is tough. But 10 years back and forth ping pong with this monument. And we will prevail. But yeah. So we depend upon, our members to support our work also.
I have a question. Is there anything we can offer to the opponents of conservation in exchange for this? How do we prioritize what absolutely is sacred to us and offer them something in return so that we avoid the ping-ponging?
Yeah, that's such a good question. This is one relatively small area. We have not taken fishing away as a livelihood. So, but, and in the design of the monument, fishermen were involved in it. They did not want it at all, but it was designed to, provide minimal impact. So I'll give you another example though. So, and this might be a little bit of hot button, but offshore wind is a great example of how do we advance this important source of clean energy in a way that minimizes the impact on traditional users, and it's the fishing industry. So in the Gulf of Maine, for about 6 years, there was a planning process, and this is how you do it. With people sitting around the table, fishermen had places around the table to say, okay, this area is really important to me. Do not put a wind energy area there. And so the design, it wasn't perfect, but it took a huge number of important fishing areas right off the table from the get-go. And I really believe that, ocean planning, that's how you do it. You got to get the stakeholders around the table. Not everybody wins, but I think, so that's where you can, give everybody what they want to a certain extent. Yeah.
There's also a comment in the chat about what about new ways to fish and trying to develop ways that are not as destructive, specifically the lobstermen.
I love that question. CLF's really involved in advancing the piloting of what we call ropeless fishing gear. And this is lobster gear that can be sent down to the seafloor without any vertical lines. And it uses these electronic transmitters, signals that when you want to go back and pick up your lobster pot or lobster trap line for that matter, you send a signal down. It opens the lead trap that sends a buoy up to the surface, and you go and you collect the lobster gear. So that could eliminate virtually all vertical lines from the lobster industry. And that's the one. I mean, there's probably a million, picture that, a million vertical lines that whales are, navigating. And in particular, the endangered right whale, where there are only 380 of those animals left. So, but I'll just say it's expensive. So there has to be an investment, from the federal government in this. And lobstermen, generally speaking, there are some that have been involved in testing and are supportive, but generally speaking, it is a just say no kind of situation with people being threatened if they engage in the pilot project. They do not want this new gear coming to them. So, but that project continues. Yeah.
Time for one more question. Anybody? So, seeing none, Priscilla, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really enlightening for me, and I'm looking at people nodding their heads and stuff. So I really appreciate your willingness to share with us.
Pleasure. And please, I mean it, get in touch directly with me if you have any questions or want to know how you can help support this truly amazing place.
Yes.
So thank you. Thanks, Henrietta.
All righty. Take care.
Okay.
All right.
Take
So long,
care,
everyone.
everybody. Have a nice summer. We'll be back.
We'll be back.